I purchased this router bit to help me approximate the profile that's on this door. So I routed the two profiles back to back and then split them apart. The idea that it's going to butt and it's going to add that profile, and the flat panel will sit in here. If I hold those up, kind of get an idea. So here is one of the rail assemblies glued up. Just has to be cleaned up now. And there's the profile on the side. And here are the long stiles on the bigger door. There's a little bit of a lip where the molding meets the stile in the rail. And I found the easiest way to deal with it is to take the flat of the chisel, score along the line like so. And then I'm able to take the same chisel and ride along the round and score it like so. And with a little bit of care, you can get these pieces up pretty cleanly. A little bit of scraping, sandpaper, look good. So here are the stiles and rails laid out for the two doors. Kind of get an idea what they're going to look like. Some came out better than others. I kind of learned as I went along. This one got a little chewed up, but I'm going to use him as the bottom rail where it'll be less noticeable. So I laid this out carefully, and I have the door laid out at 51 inches in total height, which is where it's going to be. And I have the scrap of 5mm plywood. It's 48 inches in total height, and it'll just barely fit into grooves that I can mill into the trim molding. The door I'm trying to emulate is a traditional raised panel, and I'm not going to try to make a raised panel in my shop. I think I'd have to build a pretty elaborate jig just to cut one big enough to fit in this door. And I don't really want to do that. I do have this scrap of thin plywood. I think what I'm going to do is veneer a piece of thin sheet good material onto it to give you the shadow line of a raised panel without actually being a raised panel. And I think that'll be a better solution. This being plywood will allow me to glue it into the door, making it very strong. I used the wider blade of my table saw to cut the grooves for the panel, and I used my elevated feather board to support the cut after the blade. Well, it took me 3 passes. It's a pretty good fit. I think that's going to work out quite well. So I taped the stiles and rails of the door here together, and I tested them in the opening. Luckily, it fits just about perfectly. And I'm not bragging as much as breathing a sigh of relief, because in an attempt to be frugal, which is sometimes another word for stupid, I didn't make these stiles or rails much bigger than I thought I needed. And when I went to cut them to actually fit in the door opening, I cut them as large as I could, and they just barely fit. So I'll take my victories when I get them. So it crosses my mind I'm going to have a tough time clamping these doors together because they're picture framed. And I'm going to have the panels glued in at the time that I glue in the stiles and the rails. So I came up with this idea to build a clamping jig just for this purpose. So here is my clamping jig holding the stiles and rails of the long and tall door in place. I got lucky. The local box store near me sold 6-foot lengths of this 1/4-inch threaded rod. And if I cut it long enough to handle the length of the door, the offcut, it's a little long, but certainly usable for the short side of the door. And the jig seems to work pretty well. I have it sitting on a hollow core door. It's kind of the biggest, flattest thing I have easy access to. Well, it took quite a kabuki dance. After I had it all glued up and looking good, I checked it for square and it had racked on me. So I had to take it out of the clamps and squeeze two of the corners together to get it back to square. And I was able to get these 4 corner clamps back on. And here it is glued up and dry. Each of the 4 corners look pretty tight, pretty square. Got a fair amount of glue squeeze out in there, so I think it did pretty well. And the fake raised panel stayed centered, so I think the glue up went pretty well. Well, the short rods that was in the previous glue up are actually going to be the long rods on this glue up, and these really long ones here, I think I'm going to cut them somewhere around a foot in length. And if I ever need longer pieces, to state the obvious, you can always put 2 pieces of threaded rod together with coupling nuts. Of course, the main thing you care about when you glue something like this up is, did it come out square? And that's pretty square. And when I measure diagonally, corner to corner this way, I get 52 3/4. And if I measure corner to corner this way, 52 3/4. Woohoo! Got to admit there was some degree of luck in this, but I'll take it. So I had a scrap of 5mm plywood, and I'm going to use as the panel. And here's the overlay of MDF that's going to simulate the raised panel look. And say what you want about MDF, but boy does it machine cleanly. I mean, look at how crisp those corners are. This is a 30-degree angle for no better reason than I just thought it would look good. I used my ruler marking gauge to center the panel, and then I just used a pencil to mark the 4 corners. And when you're gluing it up, you kind of want to know if you're missing, and if the line is covered, it's hard to tell. So this square is about 1/8 of an inch thick, and what I do now is I put this just a little beyond it to mark an outer corner that I'll be able to figure out if the panel is drifting a little bit easier, like so. So there's a double line there, so if I only see one line, I know that I'm too far over. And here it is glued up. Keeps wanting to drift a little bit. I don't have any fasteners holding it in place. Just waiting for the glue to tack up. So here are the 2 doors as they stand now. There's a coat of primer on them, and I'm happy to say I'm pretty pleased with the way they came out. There's so many parts and pieces and joints in these things. Thought I was going to need a lot more wood filler, but there really isn't any on it. I just primed it and carefully sanded it. Joints aren't perfect, but they look pretty good. And on the bigger door, there's actually 2 spots I did need wood filler, and that was to fill some imperfections from the stock as it came from the supply house. I gave them a light sanding. I eased all the edges and lightly sanded the profiles. Obviously didn't want to change them. Wiped them down with a damp cloth, and now we're ready for a coat of paint. So for this project I ordered these Blum hinges, and I did a little mock-up here. They are slow close hinges, which I think is a nice touch. And unfortunately it didn't come with any instructions from the retailer, but they say go onto the Blum website and look for them, and I did that. I spent about, I don't know, half hour there. Couldn't find any real instructions on the critical dimensions of this thing. Went to a couple other websites that sell these hinges. Felt kind of bad doing it, and they had instruction manuals, and some of those were undecipherable. But I did find this one, and this area here is the hinge in question. And about the only thing you really need to know is where do these screws go relative to the face frame or relative to something that you can measure. And the other critical is how far up does that cup have to be above the very edge of the board. It's kind of hard to show. I'll take it apart and show you later. In fact, there you can see the hole and how close it is to the edge. I put the cabinets in the opening of the carcass, and I'm just fine-tuning the fit now. Inset doors need a stop, so here you can see the door is retracting all the way in until it hits the shelf inside the cabinet. What I'm going to do is use this simple L bracket. I think it's the best, easiest, most effective solution. However, I don't want to be looking at a piece of steel. These pieces of self-adhesive cork, and I'm not sure how well they're going to stick to the steel. And I also have this double-sided tape, so I think I'm going to hedge my bets by using the double-sided tape to stick to the steel, and I think this cork will stick pretty well to the tape. Cleaning with acetone. And there I have some double stick tape holding the bracket in place. Just drilled the pilot holes with a self-centering bit, and here it is closing with the stops installed. Very nice. And here's a look at the cabinet with the doors installed, all finished up. Another project that came out great. Please like, subscribe, let me know what you think, and stay tuned for the next one.